The winter of 1972 came early to Mingo County, West Virginia, the kind of cold that gets inside your bones and convinces you the world has always been this cruel. On the night of October 14th, a little after 9, the payphone outside Taggart's Gas and Go started ringing and never got answered. Inside, 3 people lay dead, the attendant, a trucker passing through, and a 17-year-old girl who had stopped for gas on her way to a dance she would never reach. No money taken. No struggle that made sense. Just blood on fresh snow and a Polaroid left on the counter like a calling card, 2 teenage boys grinning, arms slung around each other, the timestamp glowing red, 8:47 p.m. By morning, Caleb and Jonah Reeves were gone. Their mother found their bedroom windows open, beds still warm, a single note in Caleb's handwriting that read, "We're sorry. Don't look for us." Search parties combed the mountains for weeks. Dogs lost the scent at the tree line. Everyone assumed the brothers had either perished in the freezes or run far enough that the law would never drag them back. 47 years passed. Generations of detectives retired with that file still open on their desks. Children who weren't born in 72 grew up hearing the story like a ghost tale. Say the Reeves Boys names 3 times at Taggart's ruined pumps and they'll come for you next. Then, on an October afternoon in 2019, almost half a century to the day, 2 hikers followed a trail of smoke rising from a valley no map bothered to name. They found a rotting hunting cabin, a thin thread of light under the door, and inside, 2 old men sitting at a table, hands folded, waiting. Grey beards, hollow eyes, clothes stitched together from decades of deer hide and burlap. When the hikers asked who they were, the taller one smiled the same crooked smile from the blood-smeared photograph and answered, soft as falling ash. "We're the Reeves Boys. And we've been waiting a very long time to tell someone what really happened." October 1972 arrived in Mingo County like a judgment. The leaves had barely begun to turn when the first hard frost glazed the hollers, sealing the dirt roads with a skin of ice that cracked under boot heels and refused to melt again until spring. Nights dropped into the teens, breath hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Folks kept their wood stoves burning around the clock and still woke to find water frozen in the kitchen buckets. It was the kind of cold that made people speak in shorter sentences, move a little faster, and lock their doors even when the nearest neighbor was 3 ridges away. On the 14th, a Saturday, the sun set blood-red behind the skeletal pines, and by 8 o'clock the temperature had already slipped below 20. Taggart's Gas and Go sat alone at the crooked intersection of Route 52 and an unnamed gravel spur that climbed into the mountains like a bad idea. The place was little more than a cinderblock box with 2 antique pumps out front, a flickering neon open sign that had been half burnt out since the Johnson administration, and a single payphone bolted to the outside wall that rang only when somebody was drunk or dying. Inside, 38-year-old Delmer Taggart was closing up. He had sent his only customer of the hour, a long-haul trucker named Ray Holbrook who paid for 20 gallons of regular and a pack of Lucky Strikes, on his way just after 8:30. Ray's rig had barely disappeared around the bend when a second vehicle pulled in, a rust-eaten 66 Chevy Impala that belonged to 17-year-old Tammy Jo McCoy, a senior at Lenoir High on her way to the fall dance in Williamson. She wore a borrowed blue dress and a nervous smile, humming along to the radio while she filled her tank. At 8:47 p.m. the Polaroid was taken. The timestamp is burned into every file, every nightmare, every grainy newspaper reprint that has circulated for half a century. In it, Caleb Reeves, tall, dark-haired, 17 going on 30, stands with his arm draped over the shoulders of his younger brother Jonah, 15, wiry, eyes too wide for his face. They are inside the station, leaning against the counter, grinning like they've just heard the best joke in the world. Behind them, barely visible through the glare on the glass, Tammy Jo's Impala sits beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, driver's door still open. By 9:05, the payphone began its unanswered ringing. A passing coal truck noticed the lights still on and the door ajar. When the driver stepped inside, he found Delmer slumped over the counter with his throat opened ear to ear, Ray Holbrook seated against the drink cooler with 3 bullets in his chest, and Tammy Jo on the floor near the magazine rack, the borrowed blue dress soaked dark, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as though something up there had called her name. No money was missing. No footprints led away from the building. Only the Polaroid remained, propped against the cash register like a signature. And by dawn, Caleb and Jonah Reeves, the boys in the picture, had vanished from the face of the earth. The first deputies arrived while the blood was still wet, their flashlights cutting tunnels through the freezing fog that rolled off Tug Fork. Sheriff Harlan Good, a man built like a coal tipple and twice as grim, stepped over Tammy Jo's body without letting his gaze linger too long. He had coached her older brother in Little League and knew the sound her mother would make when he knocked on the door at 4 a.m. State police rolled in by sunrise, their sedans sliding on the ice, crime scene tape snapping in the wind like cheap ribbon on a grave. They looked for the obvious and found nothing. No shell casings. The killer had used a .38 revolver and taken the brass with him. No tire tracks except Tammy Jo's Impala and Ray Holbrook's Kenworth, both still parked where their owners had left them. The snow around the building was untouched, a perfect white apron stretching 30 yards in every direction before the tree line swallowed it. Inside, the cash register sat open and full, $412 in crumpled bills and rolled coins exactly as Delmer had counted it at shift change. Whoever did this hadn't come for money. Then they found the Polaroid. It was wedged beneath the lip of the counter, half hidden by a cardboard display of beechnut chewing tobacco. A technician lifted it with tweezers, and the room went quiet enough to hear the hum of the drink cooler. The image was crisp, the colors still developing when the flash went off. Caleb and Jonah Reeves, unmistakable even in the grainy square, stood shoulder to shoulder behind the counter, the same counter where Delmer Taggart's blood had already begun to pool and freeze. Caleb's left hand rested on the register keys, Jonah held a can of Coca-Cola like a prop. Both boys smiled with their teeth, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes when you know the camera is evidence. The blood on the counter had spattered across the bottom third of the photo, turning the white border pink. A single thumbprint, later identified as Delmer's, marred the upper right corner, as if he had tried to grab the picture in his last second of life. Technicians tested the blood on the image first. It matched all three victims, Delmer, Ray, and Tammy Jo, layered in that order, meaning the photo had been taken after the first throat was cut but before the final shot was fired. Outside, cadaver dogs circled the pumps and sat down, confused. The trail ended at the asphalt. No footprints, no drag marks, no sign anyone had walked, run, or crawled away. It was as if the Reeves boys had posed for their own crime scene photograph and then dissolved into the mountain air, leaving only that frozen smile behind. 47 winters came and went, each one colder than the last in local memory, as if the mountains themselves refused to forgive. The search lasted 11 days. National Guard helicopters rattled over the ridges, their searchlights sweeping through bare branches like the fingers of a dying god. Men on foot beat through laurel thickets so dense they had to crawl on bellies, ice crusting their beards, rifles slung useless across their backs. Bloodhounds followed the boys' scent from the Reeves' sagging porch to the edge of the forest, then whined and circled back, noses to the ground, unable to understand why the trail simply stopped at the tree line. Temperatures plunged to 12 below. 2 volunteers were lost to hypothermia, one was found frozen upright against a poplar, his eyes still open, staring at something no one else could see. After that, the county pulled the plug. The official report said Caleb and Jonah had likely perished within 48 hours, their bodies claimed by ravines too deep or caves too hidden for dogs or men to find. The mountains kept their secrets the way they always had. Taggart's Gas and Go never reopened. The pumps rusted solid, the neon sign finally died, and teenagers began daring each other to stand inside the shell after dark. They left beer cans and cigarette butts among the dried blood no one had ever fully cleaned. On quiet nights, people driving Route 52 swore the payphone still rang, a lonely metallic trill carried on wind that smelled of coal smoke and pine. No one ever answered. The case file grew thick with theories. Cult involvement. A botched robbery by out-of-state killers who forced the brothers to pose for the photo. A government experiment gone wrong. Someone even mailed the sheriff a grainy pamphlet claiming the boys had been whisked away by black helicopters. Detectives chased every lead until the leads ran out, then chased ghosts. Every few years a new sheriff would drag the box out of storage, blow off the dust, and stare at the Polaroid until the faces blurred. Children born in the 80s and 90s grew up on the story. Mothers warned them not to take rides with strangers, not to stop at lonely gas stations after dark. Around campfires the tale mutated, The Reeves boys weren't dead, they were waiting, older now, patient, watching from the ridges with eyes that never blinked. Say their names 3 times at the ruined pumps and they would step out of the trees, still 17 and 15, still smiling that same smile, and ask if you had any Coca-Cola. The mountains listened, and the mountains never forgot. October 2019 arrived with the same iron-cold bite that had marked every anniversary of the murders. The leaves were blood-red again, the ridges sharp against a sky the color of tarnished steel. 2 graduate students from Marshall University, Leah Carter and Marcus Park, had driven up from Huntington for a weekend of leaf peeping and a half-remembered ghost story Leah's grandfather used to tell. They parked Leah's Subaru at a pull-off near the old coal camp of Sprigg, laced their boots, and followed a forgotten logging trace that hadn't seen a vehicle since the 70s. They hiked 4 hours in, deeper than any map suggested was wise, trading jokes about Bigfoot and the Reeves boys to keep the silence from pressing too close. Around 2 in the afternoon the wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of burning oak. Marcus spotted it first, a thin grey ribbon rising above the treetops, straight as a plumb line, from a hollow no trail acknowledged. They angled toward it, pushing through rhododendron so thick it left welts on their arms. The cabin appeared without warning, half swallowed by a landslide of kudzu and dead hemlock. It was smaller than a single-wide trailer, roof sagging under decades of moss, stovepipe rusted to lace. Smoke leaked from a crack in the chimney rather than the pipe itself, as though the fire inside had forgotten the proper way out. The door stood ajar on leather hinges. A single set of boot prints, barely visible under fresh-fallen leaves, led in and stopped. Leah called out once, twice. No answer except the wind worrying the tin roof. Marcus pushed the door wider with the muzzle of the bear spray he suddenly wished was something stronger. Inside, the air was thick with wood smoke and something sweeter, almost medicinal. A kerosene lantern burned low on a rough-hewn table. 2 men sat on opposite benches, hands folded like children waiting for punishment. They were ancient, faces carved deep by weather and want, beards the color of creek silt. Their clothes were patchwork, oilskin patched with burlap, boots wrapped in copper wire and duct tape. The taller one lifted his head when the light hit him. The eyes were the worst part. Pale blue, almost colorless, ringed with the red of lifelong exhaustion, but sharp, aware, and fixed on the newcomers with a calm that felt rehearsed. Leah's flashlight beam trembled across the table and caught a glint of metal, a small cassette recorder, red light blinking, already running. The taller man spoke first, voice soft, cracked from disuse but steady. "Close the door. Cold comes in quick this time of day." Then, after a pause that stretched until Leah's pulse filled her ears, he added, "We've been expecting somebody. Took long enough." Marcus shut the door with his heel because his hands had forgotten how to move. The latch clicked like a jaw snapping closed. Inside, the cabin felt smaller than it had any right to, the walls pressing in with the weight of 50 winters. The lantern flame barely reached the corners, leaving the 2 old men half-lit, half-myth. Leah's phone had no signal. The mountains had swallowed it hours ago. The taller man leaned forward. His knuckles were scarred and yellowed, nails split to the quick. When he spoke again, the words came out deliberate, as if he had practiced them in the dark for decades. "You're here about the gas station," he said. Not a question. Leah managed a nod. Marcus found his voice somewhere near the floorboards. "Who are you?" The shorter man gave a small, dry laugh that sounded like leaves scraping tin. "Names don't matter much anymore. But folks used to call us Caleb and Jonah." He tilted his head toward his companion. "His Caleb. I'm Jonah. Reeves Boys. The ones that got away." The cassette recorder's red eye stared up from the table, patient. Caleb reached out with one trembling finger and pressed the device closer to the hikers, the way a man might slide a confession across an interrogation table. "We ain't running no more," he said. "We're done hidden. But we only got one chance to tell it right, and we need it on tape. Official. Before the wrong people find us first." Jonah's gaze drifted to the single grimy window, where the last of the daylight bled out between the trees. "They're still out there," he whispered. "Always have been. Watching. Waiting for us to talk." Leah's mouth was desert dry. "You killed those people in 1972? Both men answered at once, calm as Sunday prayer. Yes. Caleb straightened, shoulders squaring for the first time in years. We slit Delma's throat first. Then the trucker. Then the girl. Took the picture ourselves. Walked into these woods right after and never looked back. His voice never rose, never wavered. We been living on deer meat and creek water ever since. 47 years of paying for what we done. But paying quiet ain't enough anymore. Jonah's fingers drummed the table, a nervous rhythm that didn't match the stillness in his eyes. Start the tape fresh, he told Marcus. We'll say it all. Every detail. Then you take it down the mountain and give it to whoever still cares. Just, don't leave us here after. Promise us that. Marcus's hand hovered over the recorder. Leah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, loud as gunfire. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the tin roof like something trying to get in. Caleb leaned close enough that she smelled wood smoke and old blood on his breath. Press record, girl, he said gently. We're ready to come home. The county sheriff's office in Williamson hadn't seen this kind of commotion since the floods of '77. By nightfall the gravel lot was choked with news vans, their satellite dishes glowing like pale moons against the black ridge. Inside the interview room, Caleb and Jonah sat side by side in orange jumpsuits 2 sizes too big, wrists cuffed to the table but back straight, almost proud. The cassette recorder, now evidence-tagged and running through a proper digital deck, captured every word in sterile clarity. Caleb spoke first, voice flat and methodical, the way a man recites a route he has walked in dreams for half a century. He described the weight of the straight razor in his palm, the way Delma's blood hissed when it hit the cold linoleum. He remembered the trucker begging, the exact pitch of Tammy Jo's scream when she realized the boys she knew from church were the last faces she would ever see. He placed the Polaroid himself, he said, because he wanted the world to know who did it and that they were not afraid. Jonah filled in the smaller details, the taste of Coca-Cola right before the killing, the sound the payphone made when they cut the cord with Delma's own pocket knife, the way the snow started falling the instant they stepped outside, thick and deliberate, erasing their tracks like God himself was an accomplice. They walked north along the ridge for 3 days, he said, eating nothing but snow and the last of their mother's cornbread until hunger stopped mattering. They built the first shelter with their bare hands, learned which mushrooms would not kill you, which roots would keep you alive until spring. They aged without mirrors, without calendars, without mercy. When the detective asked why they never came back, why they let their mother die believing her sons were rotting in a ravine somewhere, Caleb's answer was simple. We figured the devil already had our souls. Least we could do was keep him from collecting anyone else's. They spoke for 4 straight hours without once asking for water or a lawyer. The confession was airtight, almost rehearsed in its perfection. Times, distances, the exact number of steps from the magazine rack to the cooler where Ray Holbrook took his last breath. Every investigator in the room felt the same chill settle in the spine. This was the kind of closure that came once in a career, the kind that let old men sleep without the Polaroid waiting behind their eyelids. By midnight the story was already leaking to the wires. Reeves brothers found alive, confessed to 1972 triple murder. Reporters camped on the courthouse lawn, breath fogging in the cold, waiting for the brothers to be paraded out in chains. No one noticed the faint tremor in Jonah's left hand, or the way Caleb's eyes flicked to the one-way mirror whenever a new person entered the room, as if he were counting faces he had been told to expect. The first crack appeared at 2:17 a.m., when Detective Sergeant Marla Kendrick, who had inherited the original case file from her father, laid the 1972 crime scene photos side by side with the brothers' fresh statements. She noticed it the way a pianist hears one wrong note in a familiar song, the distance from the cooler to the counter. Caleb had just described it as 6 long strides, maybe 7. The tape measure in 1972 said 4.5. A man does not forget how many steps it took to kill someone he claims to see every night when he closes his eyes. By dawn the room had filled with the quiet panic that comes when a miracle starts to rot. A junior evidence tech reran the Polaroid through the new imaging software, enhancing the blood spatter the way archaeologists brush dirt from bone. The droplets on the counter were round, perfect, falling straight down. But the blood across the bottom of the photograph itself showed microscopic tails, spatter that had been flicked sideways, the signature of motion, of a picture taken while someone was already bleeding out nearby. Except the brothers claimed they snapped the shot after the killing started. The angles refused to match. Then came the memories that were too good. Jonah recited the exact price of a pack of Lucky Strikes in October 1972, 39 cents, but when pressed on what Tammy Jo had been wearing under the blue dress, something every teenager in 3 counties gossiped about for years, he described a white cardigan she had returned to her cousin 2 weeks earlier. Caleb remembered the radio playing Burning Love when they walked in, yet the station logs and 3 surviving witnesses placed it an hour earlier, during Delma's supper break. The real fracture came when Kendrick slid the original witness sketches across the table, composite drawings made from a woman who had bought gas at 8:20 p.m. and seen 2 boys outside. Caleb and Jonah studied them politely, nodded, and agreed the likenesses were fair. Then Kendrick asked why neither sketch showed the distinctive scar that ran through Caleb's left eyebrow, a scar visible in every school photo from 1968 to 1972 and still livid on the man sitting in front of her now. The room went colder than the October wind outside. Jonah's composure slipped first. He looked at his brother with something close to pleading. Caleb only stared at the table, lips moving soundlessly, rehearsing the next line of a script that had suddenly gone blank. Kendrick leaned in until her shadow covered both of them. "Boys," she said softly, "you've told us a beautiful story. Now tell us who wrote it for you." The lab in Charleston worked through the night under emergency lights, the kind of overtime that gets approved only when a 50-year-old nightmare starts bleeding again. By 9 the next morning the preliminary serology report landed in Kendrick's inbox like a live grenade. The blood smeared across the Polaroid's lower edge, the blood everyone had assumed belonged to Delma, Ray, or Tammy Jo, was AB negative, the rarest type in Appalachia. Delma had been O positive. Ray Holbrook A positive. Tammy Jo B positive. None of the victims could have left that streak. The thumbprint everyone credited to a dying Delma grabbing for the photo turned out to be Jonah's own, placed there decades after the fact. The chemical signature of the blood itself was wrong, modern anticoagulant traces, EDTA from a lab vial, not the free-flowing arterial spray of 1972. Someone had painted the picture with stage blood and let it age. DNA came back by noon. The brothers had willingly swabbed their own cheeks the night they surrendered. Not a single epithelial cell, not one mitochondrial marker from Caleb or Jonah Reeves, had ever been present at Taggart's Gas and Go. The counter, the razor, the cooler handle, the magazine rack where Tammy Jo fell, everything was clean of them. The only foreign DNA recovered in 1972 belonged to an unknown male whose profile still floated in CODIS, unsolved, mocking. Footage from the cabin, pulled off Leah Carter's phone before it died, showed something else. In the background, half hidden under a deer hide, sat a plastic storage bin. When technicians pried it open back in evidence, they found vacuum-sealed packets, hundreds of $20 bills in consecutive 1960s series, a pristine .38 revolver wrapped in oilcloth, and 6 more Polaroids, identical camera, identical film stock, each depicting the same gas station interior but at different stages of emptiness, as if someone had been rehearsing the perfect crime scene for years. The revolver's serial number traced to a gun reported stolen from a Huntington pawnshop in 1981. The bills carried fingerprints that weren't the brothers either. Someone had paid them well, to memorize a lie so complete it could pass for memory. The brothers had lived like animals for decades, yes, but not to escape justice. They had lived that way because someone needed 2 ghosts who could still bleed when the time was right. Kendrick stood over the evidence table, the fake blood Polaroid trembling slightly in her gloved hand. 47 years of grief, of bedtime warnings, of mothers locking doors against shadows, and the entire foundation had just turned to ash. Outside the window, reporters still shouted questions about closure. Inside, the case that was never closed had just cracked wide open again, revealing a darkness far older and far more patient than 2 scared old men in a mountain cabin. The interview room lights felt hotter now, surgical. Caleb and Jonah had been separated hours earlier, but the damage was already done. Jonah cracked first, alone with Kendrick and a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. He stared at the one-way mirror as if he could see straight through to whoever was still listening on the other side. "It started with a letter," he said, voice barely above the hum of the recorder. Spring of 2017. Slid under the cabin door while we were out checking snares. Plain white envelope, no stamp, our names typed on the front. Inside was a map, hand-drawn, perfect, leading to a rusted coffee can buried under a rock. $10,000 in 20s, rubber-banded, still crisp. And a note, "You boys owe the mountains a debt. Time to start paying." More letters came. Every 6 months another drop, another 10,000. Instructions followed. Memorize this detail. Practice saying it like you were there. Here is a cassette. Speak these exact words until they feel like yours. Here is a revolver. Clean it, oil it, never fire it. Here are 6 blank Polaroids. Smear this vial across the bottom of one and let it dry. The money kept them alive. The fear kept them obedient. Caleb held out longer, 3 more hours, until they played him Jonah's new statement. Then the taller man folded forward, forehead against the table, and spoke into the metal like it was confession booth grating. He visited once, Caleb whispered. Fall of '89. Came at dusk wearing a Carhartt coat and a ski mask cut for the mouth only. Voice was wrong, too smooth for these hills, like radio from far away. Said he knew what we'd done, knew things only the killer could know. Said if we ever tried to leave the valley he'd burn our mother's house with her in it. She was already dead by then, but we didn't know. He laughed when he told us. They never saw his face. He left a duffel on the porch that night, the storage bin, the gun, the fake blood, the extra photos. Told them to wait. Told them one day the world would need 2 ghosts who could still speak, and when that day came they would read their lines or everyone they ever loved would pay the difference. Jonah looked up then, eyes red but dry. We took his money. We learned his story. We thought if we gave the world its monsters, maybe the real one would finally leave us alone. He laughed once, a sound like breaking ice. Turns out he just needed the trail to die with us. The final piece arrived at 3:42 a.m., carried by a state police sergeant who looked like he had seen the devil and found him organized. The cassette from the cabin, the one the brothers had pressed on the hikers, had been a copy. The original, older, its magnetic tape brittle and brown with age, was inside a second evidence bag. Someone had mailed it anonymously to the Williamson post office 2 days earlier, addressed to Kendrick in neat block letters that matched nothing in the database. When they played it in the darkened conference room, the room filled with the sound of a much younger Caleb and Jonah, voices thin with terror, reading the exact confession they would deliver 47 years later. Between their lines came another voice, calm, almost amused, correcting pronunciation, telling them to speak slower, to smile when they said Tammy Joe's name so the tape would catch the lift in their cheeks. The stranger never identified himself, only referred to the brothers as my boys and to the murders as our little passion play. At the end, after the rehearsed confession finished, the unknown man leaned close to the microphone. The hiss of his breathing lasted 4 full seconds before he spoke. Remember, gentlemen, the world loves a closed story. Give them monsters they can name, and they'll stop looking for the one they can't. When the time comes, you will walk out of these mountains, you will surrender, and you will read every word exactly as written. In return, the people you love stay buried in peace. Break the script, and I dig them up myself, piece by piece, starting with the girl in the blue dress. The tape clicked off. No one in the room moved. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows like it had been listening too. Kendrick rewound to the stranger's last sentence and froze the waveform on the screen. There, buried under the voice, ran a faint but unmistakable carrier tone, an old shortwave frequency once used by number stations during the Cold War. When they filtered it out and slowed it down, the numbers spelled coordinates, the exact latitude and longitude of Taggart's Gas and Go, transmitted the night of the murders and never logged by anyone because no one knew to listen for it. The real killer had not simply framed 2 teenage boys in 1972. He had spent half a century cultivating replacements, training them like understudies, paying them in blood money and fear, waiting for the perfect moment to close the curtain on a crime that was never meant to end. The Reeves brothers were never the monsters. They were the epilogue, written in someone else's ink, delivered 47 years late to make certain the audience finally stopped clapping and went home in the dark.